She was having tea alone in the grand drawing room, the delicate porcelain cup resting between her fingers as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The room was vast and ornate, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Pale green walls shimmered with gold detailing, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors, and tall arched windows revealed manicured gardens beyond. Noble women filled the room, dressed in pastel gowns and adorned with jewels, gathered in careful clusters. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes were sharp. They whispered behind silk fans, pretending not to stare while observing her every movement. She felt like a misplaced piece in a perfect painting. She had not been meant to sit here. She knew that. Her invitation to the Duke's estate had been unexpected, almost suspicious. She was neither wealthy nor powerful, and her family name carried no significant weight in high society. Yet she was here, sitting straight-backed, her posture trained by years of quiet discipline, her expression calm despite the unease twisting inside her chest. She took a small sip of tea, its warmth doing little to settle her nerves. Her gown was modest compared to the others. It was lavender, carefully tailored but free of excessive embellishment. She had chosen it deliberately, hoping simplicity might help her blend in. It hadn't worked. From the moment she entered the room, the murmurs had begun. She could almost hear their questions. Who is she? Why is she here? What does the Duke want with someone like her? She set the cup down gently on its saucer, aware that even the smallest mistake could be noticed. Etiquette had become a shield for her over the years. If she followed every rule perfectly, perhaps she could remain invisible. But invisibility was proving impossible. Across the room, the Duke's mother stood speaking with a group of women. She was tall and elegant, her silver hair styled perfectly, her presence commanding without effort. She had ruled this household for decades, and everyone knew it. When she laughed, others laughed. When she frowned, the room seemed to hold its breath. The young woman avoided looking in her direction, though she could sense the older woman's gaze sweeping the room like a hawk's. The tea service continued, servants moving silently, refilling cups and offering pastries. The air was filled with the faint scent of roses and expensive perfume. Time stretched uncomfortably, each minute feeling heavier than the last. She wondered how long she would be expected to stay, and whether she could leave without causing offense. Then it happened. A sudden hush spread through the room, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations faltered, laughter died mid-sentence. The young woman felt the shift before she understood it. She looked up just as the Duke's mother began walking toward her. Every step seemed deliberate, measured, echoing softly against the marble floor. The noble women parted instinctively, creating a clear path. The young woman's heart began to race. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over her chair, and smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. Her mind raced through every possible reason for this approach. Had she broken some rule? Had she offended someone without realizing it? The Duke's mother stopped directly in front of her. Up close, her sharp gray eyes were even more intimidating. For a moment, she said nothing, simply studying the young woman's face as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. The room was silent now. Every ear strained to hear, every eye fixed on them. The older woman leaned closer, her voice lowering to a whisper meant only for the young woman. "Prepare yourself," she said softly. "Your life is about to change." The words sent a chill through her. Before she could respond, the Duke's mother straightened and turned to address the room. "Ladies," she announced calmly, "our guest will be joining us for dinner this evening." Gasps rippled through the room. Dinner was not a casual affair. It was an honor reserved for those of importance, those being considered for alliances, marriages, or favors. The young woman felt the blood drain from her face. She had not been prepared for this. She had not been told anything beyond afternoon tea. "I believe she will find it enlightening," the Duke's mother added, a faint smile touching her lips. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the young woman standing there, stunned and exposed. Whispers erupted instantly, louder now, no longer restrained. She could hear fragments. Dinner? Why her? Is she related to someone important? Perhaps the Duke has taken an interest. Her stomach tightened painfully. The Duke. She had not seen him yet. In fact, she had been careful not to look for him. The idea that he might already be watching her made her uneasy. A servant approached, bowing slightly. "My lady, if you would follow me, you will be shown to your chambers to prepare." She nodded, unable to speak, and followed him out of the drawing room. As she walked through the long corridors, her thoughts raced. Dinner could mean many things. It could be a simple courtesy, or it could be the beginning of something far more serious. In this world, invitations were rarely innocent. Her chambers were larger than any room she had ever stayed in. A four-poster bed draped in soft fabric dominated the space, and a large mirror stood near the window. A maid was already waiting, ready to assist her with dressing. Dresses were laid out across a chaise, all far more elegant than what she currently wore. "These are for you, my lady," the maid said respectfully. The Duke's mother selected them herself. That fact alone made her hands shake. As the maid helped her change, she stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked composed, even beautiful, but behind her eyes was a storm of fear and uncertainty. She thought of her simple life before this estate, of quiet mornings and predictable days. That life felt impossibly distant now. When she was finally ready, dressed in a deep blue gown that seemed to transform her into someone else entirely, she took a deep breath. Whatever awaited her at dinner, she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back, and somewhere in the vast estate, the Duke was making a decision that would bind their fates together, whether she was ready or not. The corridor outside her chambers seemed longer than before, its walls lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes appeared to follow her every step. The soft glow of candlelight reflected off gilded frames, creating an illusion of movement, as if the past itself were alive and watching. She walked slowly, her gloved hands clasped in front of her, the fabric of her deep blue gown whispering against the polished floor. Each step carried her closer to the dinner she had never anticipated and the destiny she could not yet comprehend. Her mind replayed the Duke's mother's words again and again. "Prepare yourself. Your life is about to change." The sentence echoed like a warning and a promise intertwined. She had been raised to accept change with grace, but nothing in her upbringing had prepared her for the weight of this moment. She was a guest in a world where one wrong move could alter her future forever. As she reached the entrance to the dining hall, two tall doors stood closed, carved with intricate designs of vines and lions. A servant announced her arrival in a clear, formal voice. The doors opened slowly, revealing a long table set beneath a grand chandelier. Silverware gleamed, crystal glasses caught the light, and the scent of rich food filled the air. Conversations paused as heads turned toward her. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. At the far end of the table sat the Duke's mother, composed and regal, her expression unreadable. To her right, seated in a high-backed chair, was the Duke himself. She recognized him instantly, though she had never seen him before. There was an authority about him that did not need to be declared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark formal attire that contrasted sharply with his pale skin and sharp features. His eyes were calm, assessing, and when they met hers, something unreadable passed between them. He did not smile, but neither did he look away. The Duke's mother gestured to an empty seat near the middle of the table. "Please," she said smoothly, "join us." She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair with careful precision. The Duke watched her as she sat, his gaze steady, thoughtful. She felt exposed under his attention, as though he were seeing more than her polished exterior. She kept her eyes on her place setting, determined not to betray her nervousness. Dinner began with quiet efficiency. Courses were served one after another, each more elaborate than the last. The conversation flowed around her, discussions of politics, land, and alliances filling the air. She listened more than she spoke, answering only when addressed directly. Every word she chose carefully, aware that her voice carried more weight here than it ever had before. "You come from the countryside, do you not?" the Duke asked suddenly. She looked up, startled, meeting his gaze. Yes, Your Grace, she replied evenly. A small town, far from the capital. Do you miss it? He continued, his tone curious rather than judgmental. I do, she admitted after a brief pause. It is quiet, predictable. A faint hint of amusement crossed his face. Predictability can be comforting, he said, but it rarely leads to greatness. She was unsure how to respond, so she inclined her head slightly. The Duke's mother observed the exchange closely, her eyes sharp with interest. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. The Duke spoke little, but when he did, others listened. She noticed how servants responded instantly to his subtle gestures, how the entire room seemed to orbit around his presence. This was a man accustomed to command, to obedience, to being at the center of every decision. When dessert was served, the Duke's mother set down her spoon and addressed the table. There is a matter I wish to discuss, she said calmly. The room quieted at once. Our guest has been invited here for a reason, she continued, her gaze settling briefly on the young woman. One that goes beyond courtesy. Her pulse quickened. She felt every pair of eyes turned toward her, their curiosity no longer disguised. The future of this estate, the older woman said, depends on careful choices. Alliances must be made wisely, with consideration for character as much as lineage. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The Duke remained silent, his expression controlled. I have observed her closely, the Duke's mother went on. Her composure, her intelligence, her restraint. These qualities are rare. A murmur rippled through the guests. The young woman's hands trembled beneath the table. Praise in this setting was never without consequence. The Duke finally spoke. Mother, he said evenly, perhaps this discussion would be better continued privately. A small smile curved the older woman's lips. Of course, she replied, but some matters benefit from witnesses. She turned back to the young woman. You may not yet understand why you are here, she said, but understand this. You have been chosen. The word chosen struck her like a blow. Chosen for what? Before she could ask, the Duke stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor echoed loudly. That will be all for tonight, he said firmly. The guests are tired. It was a dismissal, and everyone recognized it as such. Chairs shifted as people rose, offering polite farewells. Whispers followed as they filed out, speculation thick in the air. She remained seated, unsure whether she was meant to leave as well. The Duke's mother watched her carefully, then nodded toward the Duke. Go, she said softly. He will explain. Her heart raced as she stood and followed him from the dining hall. They walked in silence through another corridor, their footsteps echoing. Finally, he stopped before a large window overlooking the moonlit gardens. You were not meant to learn everything tonight, he said without turning to face her. My mother has a tendency to move faster than I prefer. She gathered her courage. Your Grace, she said, I do not understand why I am here at all. He turned then, his gaze steady and intense. Because this estate needs a duchess, he said simply, and because you may be the only one suitable. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. She felt the world tilt slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Marriage, power, a life she had never imagined. I will not force you, he added quietly. But know this, if you remain here, nothing will ever be the same. She looked at him, searching his face for reassurance or threat, but found only honesty. In that moment, she realized the tea she had been drinking alone that afternoon belonged to another lifetime entirely. The night air was cool against her skin as she stood by the tall window, staring out at the moonlit gardens below. The Duke's words echoed relentlessly in her mind. This estate needs a duchess. The sentence felt unreal, like a line spoken in a play she had wandered into by mistake. She had imagined many futures for herself, but none of them involved standing beside one of the most powerful men in the country, bound by duty and expectation. You do not have to answer now, the Duke said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, measured, but she sensed an undercurrent of tension beneath it. Tonight has been overwhelming. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said honestly. It has. He gestured toward a small seating area near the window. Sit, he said gently. We should speak openly, without an audience. She hesitated for only a moment before taking a seat, folding her hands in her lap. He remained standing, his posture relaxed yet alert, as though he were accustomed to weighing decisions even in moments of quiet conversation. My mother believes in decisive action, he began. She sees potential and moves to secure it. Sometimes she forgets that people are not pieces on a board. Do you agree with her? She asked softly. He considered the question carefully before answering. I agree that this estate needs stability, he said. That my position requires a partner who understands responsibility, restraint, and loyalty. But I do not believe such a partnership can be forced. She looked down at her hands, her thoughts racing. Why me? She asked. There are countless women of higher rank, with stronger family connections. Women who have been raised for this role. He studied her closely. Most of them have been raised to want power, he said. Few have been raised to respect it. The sincerity in his tone unsettled her more than arrogance would have. She had expected manipulation, persuasion, perhaps even pressure. Instead, she was being offered an explanation. You watched me at tea, she said quietly. Yes, he admitted. You were alone, yet you did not seek attention. You followed every rule, yet you did not seem ruled by fear. You listened more than you spoke. Those details matter. She exhaled slowly. I was terrified, she confessed. A faint smile touched his lips. Courage is not the absence of fear, he said. It is the decision not to be controlled by it. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Less threatening, more contemplative. I would be lying if I said this proposal carries no risk for you, he continued. Life here is not gentle. Every choice is observed. Every mistake is remembered. You would lose the anonymity you currently possess and gain a life that is not my own, she said. He did not deny it. You would gain influence, he said, a voice, the ability to protect others as well as yourself. But yes, you would also sacrifice freedom. She rose from her seat and walked a few steps away, needing movement to think. The gardens below seemed impossibly peaceful compared to the storm in her mind. She thought of her childhood, of modest rooms and familiar faces, of mornings that belonged only to her. That life felt fragile now, like something already slipping through her fingers. What if I refuse? She asked, turning back to him. He met her gaze without hesitation. Then you will leave this estate with my protection, he said. No harm will come to you. My mother will be displeased, but she will accept my decision. That answer surprised her. It carried no threat, no hidden consequence. For the first time that evening, she felt a measure of control return to her. And if I stay, she asked, then you will be given time, he said. Time to learn, to observe, to decide whether this life is one you can endure. Nothing will be announced until you are certain. She studied his face, searching for deceit. She found none. Instead, she saw a man burdened by expectation, bound to a role as tightly as any contract. I will stay, she said finally. For now. Relief flickered briefly across his expression before it vanished behind composure. That is all I ask, he said. A knock sounded at the door, sharp and deliberate. Before either of them could respond, it opened. The Duke's mother stepped inside, her gaze moving instantly between them. I trust the conversation was productive, she said. The Duke inclined his head slightly. She has agreed to remain as our guest, he replied. Nothing more. The older woman's eyes lingered on the young woman, assessing, calculating. Excellent, she said. Tomorrow, then we begin. Begin what? The young woman asked before she could stop herself. The Duke's mother smiled thinly. Your education, she said. If you are to stand beside my son, you must understand the world you are entering. The following morning began earlier than she was accustomed to. Sunlight had barely touched the windows when a maid arrived with breakfast and instructions. Her schedule had been carefully planned, leaving little room for rest or reflection. Her first lesson was etiquette, though she believed she already understood its basics. She quickly learned how wrong she was. Every gesture, every pause, every inflection of her voice carried meaning. A misplaced glance could be interpreted as insult. A moment of silence could signal weakness. Next came history. She was introduced to the lineage of the estate, the alliances forged and broken over generations. Names and dates blurred together, but she sensed their importance. This family's past was not merely recorded, it was enforced. By midday, her mind ached with information. Still, there was no respite. She was escorted to the gardens, where the Duke waited. "Walk with me," he said. They moved along the gravel path at a measured pace. Servants remained at a distance, close enough to observe, but far enough to allow the illusion of privacy. "You will find my mother demanding," he said. "She believes pressure reveals character." "And what do you believe?" she asked. "I believe pressure breaks people," he said, "unless they're given something to hold on to." She glanced at him. "And what would that be?" "Purpose," he replied. They stopped near a fountain, water cascading softly over carved stone. He turned to face her fully. "If you choose this life," he said, "I will expect honesty from you. Not obedience, not perfection, honesty." She nodded slowly. "Then I will expect the same," she said. For a brief moment, something like admiration crossed his face. "Fair," he said. As days passed, her presence at the estate became a subject of constant speculation. Invitations arrived from neighboring families, thinly veiled attempts to uncover the truth. She learned to smile without revealing, to speak without committing. At night, alone in her chambers, doubt crept in. She questioned her decision, her strength, her right to even consider such a role. Yet each morning, she rose and continued. One evening, as she prepared for another formal dinner, the Duke's mother entered her room unannounced. "You are progressing," the older woman said. "Faster than I expected." "Thank you," she replied cautiously. "Do not mistake my approval for kindness," the Duke's mother added. "I'm watching you closely. If you falter, I will not hesitate to replace you." The threat was clear, but so was the challenge. The young woman met her gaze steadily. "I understand," she said. As the door closed behind the older woman, she exhaled slowly. Fear still lived within her, but it no longer ruled her. She was changing, adapting, becoming someone new. Unbeknownst to her, the Duke watched these changes with growing interest. What had begun as necessity was evolving into something more complicated, something neither of them had planned for. And in the quiet corners of the estate, whispers began to shift. This was no longer a question of whether she could become a duchess. It was a question of whether the estate was ready for the woman she was becoming. The rhythm of the estate began to seep into her bones. Each day followed a structure so precise it felt carved in stone. Yet within that structure, she learned where she could breathe and where she must remain still. Mornings were devoted to lessons, afternoons to observation, evenings to appearances. She discovered that survival here depended not on perfection, but on awareness. She learned to read runes the way others read books. A raised eyebrow from a countess meant curiosity disguised as disdain. A prolonged silence from a lord meant calculation. Compliments were rarely gifts, they were probes. She responded carefully, offering just enough warmth to appear gracious, never enough to seem vulnerable. The Duke observed all of it. He never corrected her publicly. Instead, during quiet walks or brief conversations, he would ask questions that forced her to reflect on her choices. "Why did you answer that way? What did you notice when she spoke?" At first, his questions unsettled her. Later, she realized they were lessons of a different kind. "You noticed the pause," he said one afternoon after a tense luncheon. "Most people don't." She wanted a reaction, she replied. I refused to give her one. A faint smile appeared. Exactly. His approval was subtle, but it mattered more to her than she cared to admit. Not everyone welcomed her growing presence. Resistance came quietly at first. Invitations that excluded her. Conversations that stopped when she approached. Smiles that did not reach the eyes. She understood the reason. She was an outsider, threatening an established order. If she succeeded, someone else would lose. The first open challenge came during a formal reception held in the East Wing. The room was crowded, music floating softly through the air, crystal glasses clinking with rehearsed cheer. She stood beside the Duke, acutely aware of her position. This was the first time she had appeared so publicly at his side. A young noblewoman stepped forward, her posture flawless, her smile sharp. "How fortunate," she said sweetly, addressing the Duke. "We were wondering when you would introduce your guest." The emphasis was deliberate. "She is more than a guest," the Duke replied evenly. The noblewoman's eyes flicked toward her. "Of course," she said. "Forgive me. It must be overwhelming, finding oneself here so suddenly." The room seemed to lean in, eager for her response. She met the woman's gaze calmly. "It is," she said, "but I have found that sudden changes reveal much about one's character." A ripple of murmurs followed. The noblewoman's smile tightened before she inclined her head and stepped back. The exchange was brief, but its impact was immediate. Word spread quickly. She was not as easily dismissed as some had hoped. Later that evening, as they stood near a balcony overlooking the gardens, the Duke spoke quietly. "You handle that well." "I spoke the truth," she said. "That is often the most dangerous choice," he replied, "and the most effective." As the weeks passed, her education deepened. She was introduced to matters of land management, trade negotiations, and correspondence with neighboring estates. She listened, asked questions, and absorbed everything. For the first time in her life, she felt intellectually challenged in a way that excited rather than frightened her. Yet with growth came pressure. Rumors began to circulate beyond the estate walls. Some claimed she was a calculated choice, others that she was a temporary distraction. A few whispered darker theories, questioning her past, her motives, her worth. Each rumor reached her eventually, carried by servants' glances or half-finished sentences. One afternoon, overwhelmed, she sought refuge in the small library tucked away in the West Wing. It was rarely used, its shelves filled with old volumes and forgotten histories. She sat by the window, a book open in her lap, though she could not focus on the words. The Duke found her there. "You disappeared," he said. "I needed quiet," she replied. He nodded, understanding. "They will test you more aggressively now," he said. "You are becoming real to them." "I did not ask for this," she said softly. "No," he agreed. "But you are rising to it nonetheless." She looked up at him. "Do you ever wish for simpler life?" His answer came after a pause. "Sometimes," he said, "but wishing does not change responsibility." She closed the book. "I am afraid of losing myself," she admitted. He considered her words carefully. "Power does not erase who you are," he said. "It amplifies it. That is why choosing the right person matters." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The Duke's mother appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. "There has been a development," she said. They followed her to the study, where documents were spread across the desk. Letters from neighboring estates, formal and thinly veiled in their intent. "They are pressing for clarity," the older woman said. "They sense uncertainty." The Duke's jaw tightened. "It is too soon." "Soon or not," his mother replied. "Indecision invites challenge." All eyes turned to her. "You are at the center of this," the Duke's mother said, "whether you wish to be or not. If you remain undefined, others will define you." The weight of the moment settled heavily on her chest. She understood what was being asked, even if it was not spoken aloud. That night, sleep eluded her. She stood by her window, staring into the darkness, her thoughts tangled. She had come here uncertain and afraid. Now, uncertainty remained, but fear had shifted. It was no longer fear of the unknown, but fear of choice. By morning, she made a decision. At breakfast, with the household gathered, she spoke before doubt could silence her. "I will continue," she said calmly. "I will not hide, and I will not rush. But I will stand openly." The room fell silent. The Duke's mother studied her intently, then nodded once. "Very well," she said. "Then we proceed." The Duke met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Respect, trust, perhaps the beginning of something deeper. As the day unfolded, messages were sent, meetings arranged, and plans set into motion. The estate adjusted around her choice, reshaping itself subtly but unmistakably. She realized then that the tea she once drank alone had been a test she never knew she was taking. and she had passed it. The announcement changed everything. From that morning onward, her presence was no longer tentative or questioned. It was acknowledged. Servants addressed her with a new tone of respect, subtle but unmistakable. Invitations arrived not as curiosities, but as expectations. The estate itself seemed to rearrange around her, as though recognizing her decision as a shift in its balance. With clarity came resistance. The first letter arrived 3 days later, sealed with the crest of a neighboring house known for its ambition. It was polite, carefully worded, and dangerous. The message congratulated the Duke on his prospective alliance, while subtly questioning her suitability. The implication was clear. This choice would not go unchallenged. The Duke read the letter in silence, then handed it to her. "They're testing resolve," he said. "Not yours. Mine." She read it carefully, her expression steady. "Then they should receive an answer," she said. His eyes sharpened slightly. "What kind?" "An honest one," she replied, "but not a defensive one." That evening, a response was sent, brief, formal, and unmistakably firm. It affirmed her position without justification or apology. Within days, the tone of correspondence began to change. Curiosity replaced doubt. Caution replaced dismissal. Not everyone adjusted so easily. At a luncheon hosted by the Duke's mother, she found herself seated between two women whose smiles were flawless and intentions transparent. Their questions were gentle, their interest excessive. "You adapt remarkably well," one of them remarked. "Some would say too well." She met the woman's gaze calmly. "Adaptation is survival," she said. "I've always valued it." The second woman laughed softly. "And ambition?" She smiled. "Ambition depends on the goal." The exchange ended there, but the message had been sent. She was not naive, nor was she eager to please. Later that day, the Duke's mother summoned her privately. "You are becoming a subject of conversation," the older woman said. "This is inevitable. What matters is control." "I understand," she replied. "Do you?" The Duke's mother studied her closely. "Control is not silence. It is direction. You must decide what they say about you." The lesson was clear. Perception was power. That night, instead of retreating early, she attended a small gathering in the music room. She listened, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke just enough to be remembered favorably. By the end of the evening, whispers followed her, but they were different now. Less venom, more intrigue. The Duke watched from a distance. "You're learning quickly," he said when they finally spoke alone. "I have to," she replied. "They will not give me time otherwise." He nodded. "They never do." As days turned into weeks, the pressure intensified. Discussions of land disputes, trade routes, and alliances unfolded around her. She was no longer an observer. She was consulted. At first cautiously, then increasingly directly. One afternoon, during a meeting with advisors, a disagreement arose over a proposed agreement that favored short-term gain over long-term stability. Voices rose. Opinions clashed. She spoke only once. "If we accept this," she said calmly, "we solve a problem today and create 3 tomorrow." Strength is not proven by expansion alone. It is proven by endurance. Silence followed. The Duke considered her words, then nodded. "We will revise the terms," he said. When the advisors left, he turned to her. "You changed the course of that decision." "I hope I did not overstep," she said. "You did not," he replied. "You saw what others ignored." That night, she felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on her shoulders. It was heavier than fear, heavier than doubt. But it was real. Not all challenges came from outside. The Duke's mother grew quieter in her presence, her approval no longer immediate. One evening, she spoke plainly. "You are gaining influence," she said. "That is expected. But influence must be balanced with restraint." "Do you believe I lack restraint?" she asked. "I believe you are discovering your power," the older woman replied. "And power tempts even the most disciplined." The warning lingered. Later, alone with the Duke in the library, she voiced her concern. "Your mother does not trust me." "She does," he said. "She fears what she cannot predict." "And you?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "I trust your judgment," he said, "even when it challenges mine." The admission surprised her. As the season progressed, an official visit was announced. A delegation from a powerful house would arrive within the week. Their approval or disapproval would influence the standing of the estate significantly. "They will scrutinize you," the Duke said. "Relentlessly." "I am ready," she replied, though she was not entirely certain it was true. The night before their arrival, sleep escaped her once more. She stood at the window, watching the lights flicker across the grounds. The estate no longer felt foreign. It felt demanding, alive. She realized then that her fear had transformed again. She was no longer afraid of being chosen. She was afraid of failing what she had chosen to become. And that fear, she knew, would either destroy her or forge her into exactly what this world required. The delegation arrived under gray skies, their carriages rolling through the gates with measured precision. The atmosphere of the estate shifted instantly. Every servant moved with sharpened focus. Every corridor hummed with quiet urgency. This visit was not ceremonial. It was evaluative. The future balance of power would be influenced by what occurred over the next few days. She stood beside the Duke at the entrance hall, her posture composed, her expression neutral. She wore a gown chosen for authority rather than beauty, deep charcoal with understated detailing. It was a deliberate choice. She was not here to charm. She was here to be taken seriously. The head of the delegation stepped forward, his gaze assessing, impersonal. Introductions were made, formalities exchanged. When his eyes settled on her, they lingered slightly longer than courtesy required. "So," he said, "you are the lady we have heard so much about." She met his gaze calmly. "Then I hope the stories have been accurate," she replied. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Time will tell." The first dinner was a test, disguised as hospitality. Questions came subtly, layered within polite conversation. They asked about her background, her understanding of estate affairs, her role in recent decisions. She answered carefully, neither defensive nor evasive. When she did not know something, she admitted it without apology. The Duke watched closely, intervening only when necessary. More than once, he allowed silence to stretch after a question, giving her space to respond on her own terms. It was a risk. She recognized it as trust. The following morning, discussions turned to trade. Maps were spread across the long table. Figures exchanged with precision. The delegation proposed an arrangement that appeared generous on the surface, but she noticed the omissions immediately. Key routes were undefined. Timelines were vague. She spoke up. "These terms leave too much to interpretation," she said. "Clarity protects both sides." The head delegate studied her. "Interpretation allows flexibility. It allows exploitation," she replied evenly, "which would eventually harm us both." The room went still. The Duke leaned forward. "We will require more specific language," he said, "on all points." By the end of the meeting, the delegation's tone had shifted. Respect replaced skepticism. They no longer questioned her presence. They calculated it. Not all reactions were favorable. That afternoon, she overheard a heated exchange between two visiting nobles in the gallery. Her name surfaced, followed by a sharp laugh and a dismissive comment. She did not react outwardly, but the words lingered. That evening, alone in her chambers, doubt resurfaced. "Am I pushing too hard?" she asked when the Duke joined her later. "No," he said. "You are pushing correctly. They are uncomfortable because they expected compliance, not competence." "Your mother warned me about restraint," she said. "She warned you about visibility," he replied. "There is a difference." The next day brought the most difficult test. A formal address was scheduled, during which the delegation would announce their preliminary position. The hall was full, tension thick in the air. She stood beside the Duke, acutely aware that every expression, every breath, was being observed. The head delegate spoke at length, praising the estate's stability and leadership. Then he turned slightly, his gaze settling on her. "We also recognize," he said carefully, "that recent changes have introduced uncertainty." The implication was unmistakable. Before the Duke could respond, she stepped forward. "Uncertainty exists only when intentions are unclear," she said. Our intentions are simple: strength through transparency, stability through fairness. Any alliance built on anything less would be temporary at best. Murmurs spread through the hall. The delegate studied her, then nodded slowly. A compelling position, he said, one that suggests confidence rather than insecurity. The address concluded with no formal decision, but the tension eased. The message had been delivered. That night, the delegation requested a private meeting with the Duke alone. She waited, pacing the length of her room, her thoughts racing. When the Duke finally returned, his expression was unreadable. "They have agreed to the revised terms," he said. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by something else: pride. "They credited your influence," he added. Privately, she exhaled slowly. "Then it was worth it." The Duke's mother summoned her shortly after. "You performed well," the older woman said. "Better than well." "Thank you," she replied, cautious. "Do not mistake this for acceptance," the Duke's mother continued. "It is acknowledgement. You are no longer hypothetical." The words carried weight. Later, walking alone through the gardens, she reflected on how far she had come. The fear that once paralyzed her now sharpened her focus. Each challenge revealed not just her weaknesses, but her resilience. The Duke joined her, falling into step beside her. "They will never underestimate you again," he said. "I do not want fear," she replied. "I want respect." He looked at her, something deep and unreadable in his eyes. "You have both," he said. In that moment, she understood something crucial. Her role here was no longer conditional. It was inevitable, and with inevitability came consequences she had yet to face. The shift between them was subtle, but irreversible. What had once been formality layered with caution had become coordination. Decisions were no longer discussed after the fact. They were shaped together. The estate began to function differently, not because rules changed, but because intent aligned. And alignment, she quickly learned, frightened people more than authority ever could. The first true fracture appeared during preparations for the seasonal assembly, a gathering that drew influential houses from across the region. Attendance was expected. Absence was interpreted. Every detail carried political weight. She was reviewing guest placements when she noticed the omission. A powerful family, one whose loyalty had always been assumed, had been seated far from the center. It was a quiet demotion, one that would not go unnoticed. "This will provoke them," she said, handing the chart to the Duke. "Yes," he replied, which means it was intentional. They traced the change back to a senior coordinator, someone trusted, someone careful. Too careful. "They're testing whether we're paying attention," she said. "Then we respond," he said, without revealing that we noticed. On the night of the assembly, the estate came alive. Candlelight filled the halls. Music echoed through stone corridors, and layered conversations wove alliances in real time. She entered beside the Duke, her presence now expected rather than questioned. Eyes followed them, not curious but calculating. She felt it clearly then. This was not observation anymore. It was assessment. Midway through the evening, the head of the slighted family approached. His greeting was polite, his tone controlled, his irritation barely concealed. "We were surprised by our placement," he said. She answered before the Duke could. "Placement reflects discussion relevance," she said calmly. "Your interests tonight were scheduled later." It was neither apology nor accusation. He studied her carefully. "And who decides relevance?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "Those responsible for outcomes." A pause, then a slow nod. "Understood," he said. The exchange rippled outward. Others noticed. Lines adjusted. Conversations recalibrated. The message spread without being spoken. She was no longer an extension of the Duke. She was an authority in her own right. Later, alone in a quiet corridor, the Duke spoke softly. "You redirected that without escalating." "I learned from watching you," she replied. He looked at her with something close to admiration. "Then you've surpassed observation." Not all responses were so measured. Before the night ended, a rumor surfaced, carefully planted, quickly spreading. It questioned her origin again, this time with implication rather than curiosity. Whispers followed her steps. A few glances turned colder. She did not react. Instead, she made herself visible. She engaged openly, laughed lightly, discussed policy with confidence. By the time the night ended, the rumor had lost its momentum, drowned by her composure. The Duke's mother watched everything. Later, in the stillness of her private sitting room, she spoke plainly. "They are escalating," she said. "And so are you." "I have no desire for conflict," she replied. "Neither do they," the older woman said. "They desire control." A long pause followed. "You are no longer being measured against expectation," the Duke's mother continued. "You are being measured against legacy." The weight of that settled deeply. That night, sleep did not come easily. She stood by the window once more, but the view no longer brought uncertainty. It brought resolve. When the Duke joined her, he did not speak at first. "They will force a decision soon," he said finally. "Public. Irreversible." "I know," she replied. "You still have the option to step away," he said. "Before that happens." She turned to face him fully. "Do you want me to?" He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "No." The honesty between them was complete now. No ceremony. No pretense. "Then I will stay," she said. "Not because I was chosen. Because I choose this." He nodded once. "Then we move forward together." In that moment, something settled into place. Not romance, not obligation, but partnership forged under pressure. The estate would feel the consequences of that choice soon enough, because the next challenge would not come disguised as whispers or paperwork. It would come openly, and it would demand more than composure. It would demand allegiance. The pressure that followed her choice was immediate and unrelenting. Word spread quickly through the estate and beyond that she had chosen to remain not as a guest, not as a possibility, but as a deliberate presence. That distinction mattered. It removed uncertainty and replaced it with inevitability, and inevitability unsettled those who thrived on ambiguity. The first sign of open resistance came disguised as concern. At breakfast, one of the senior household advisors approached her with a carefully neutral expression. "There is growing anxiety among the outer houses," he said. "Some fear the pace of change is too rapid." She set her cup down calmly. "Change is only frightening when it lacks direction," she replied. "Does anyone doubt the direction of this estate?" He hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. By midday, anxiety had taken form. A formal request arrived for a council session that evening, unusually timed and broadly attended. Too broad. It was not meant for discussion. It was meant for exposure. "They want to see where you stand," the Duke said quietly as they reviewed the notice together. "Publicly." "And you?" she asked. "I will stand where I always have," he replied. "With the estate." It was not reassurance. It was reality. The council chamber filled quickly that night. Faces both familiar and newly attentive turned toward her as she entered beside the Duke. The air felt charged, every breath heavy with expectation. The discussion opened politely enough: trade updates, border matters, seasonal planning. Then a shift came. A lord known for his measured tone leaned forward. "There is concern," he said carefully, "that recent decisions reflect influence not formally recognized." Silence followed. She did not look to the Duke. She did not look to his mother. She looked directly at the speaker. "Influence is not claimed," she said. "It is exercised, and responsibility follows it." Murmurs spread. Another voice joined in. "Responsibility without title is dangerous." She nodded once. "Which is why I have not acted without accountability." "And to whom?" the Lord pressed. "Are you accountable?" "To this estate," she said evenly. "To its future, and to the consequences of every decision I advise." The Duke spoke then, his voice steady and unmistakably final. "She speaks with my authority." That changed everything. The room reacted instantly. Some faces hardened. Others relaxed. A few revealed calculation sharpened into resolve. The question was no longer whether she belonged here. It was how much power she now held. The Duke's mother watched from her seat, her expression unreadable. The meeting concluded without resolution, but resolution had never been its purpose. Lines had been drawn, positions exposed. Later that night, the Duke's mother requested a private conversation. You have crossed the point of quiet acceptance, she said. From now on, opposition will not disguise itself as etiquette. I expected that, she replied. Did you? The older woman asked. Because from this point forward, any failure will not be forgiven as inexperience. It will be judged as weakness. She met the woman's gaze steadily. Then I will not fail. A long pause followed. You are no longer being tested, the Duke's mother said finally. You are being weighed. In the days that followed, challenges came swiftly. A trade partner withdrew unexpectedly. A shipment delayed without explanation. An invitation extended to the Duke, but not to her. Each slight was deliberate. Each one measured. She addressed them one by one, not with confrontation, but with correction. Alternatives were arranged. Communications clarified. Absences noted, but not protested. The estate adapted around her responses. One evening, exhausted, she found herself once more in the quiet library. The Duke joined her without announcement. They are forcing you to prove permanence, he said. I know, she replied. They will not stop until they believe I cannot be removed. And do you believe that? He asked. She considered the question carefully. I believe permanence is earned, she said, not declared. He studied her, then nodded. That answer will unsettle them. A message arrived before dawn 2 days later. A formal challenge. A powerful house had requested a joint arbitration over disputed land. Public, binding, and intentionally unbalanced. Acceptance would place her directly in the center of judgment. Refusal would be interpreted as retreat. They are daring you, the Duke said. She read the document slowly, then folded it. Then I will answer. The arbitration was held in neutral territory, surrounded by observers and witnesses. She stood beside the Duke, her presence undeniable. Arguments were presented, voices raised, histories invoked. When it was her turn to speak, she did not defend. She reframed. This dispute exists, she said calmly, because clarity was postponed for convenience. We will not repeat that error. She laid out terms that favored neither side entirely, but secured long-term stability. It was not generous. It was fair. The opposing house resisted at first. Then calculations shifted. Fairness, they realized, offered fewer risks than defiance. The agreement was signed before sunset. On the return journey, the Duke spoke quietly. You just established yourself beyond this estate. She exhaled slowly. I established responsibility. That night, as the estate gates closed behind them, she understood something with startling clarity. There would be no retreat now, no return to anonymity, no quiet undoing of what had begun. She had stepped fully into the space between power and consequence, and the world was already responding. The aftermath of the arbitration settled over the estate like a slow, deliberate tide. Nothing appeared different at first glance. The halls remained polished, the schedules precise, the greetings courteous. Yet beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Her name was now spoken without qualification, not as a possibility, not as an experiment, but as a presence that carried consequence. Messages arrived daily. Some were respectful inquiries, seeking guidance or clarification. Others were cautiously worded invitations, extended as much to measure her response as to request her attendance. A few were thinly veiled warnings, reminders that permanence always provoked resistance. She read each one carefully, answering only what required response, allowing silence to do the rest. Silence, she had learned, could be as decisive as speech. The Duke's mother watched this progression with a reserved intensity. One evening, as they walked together through the eastern corridor, she spoke without preamble. You have accelerated matters, she said. Yes, she replied. Delay would have invited fracture. The older woman studied her profile. You are correct, she admitted, which makes you dangerous. She accepted the statement without defensiveness. So, the stagnation. A faint smile appeared. You will survive here, the Duke's mother said. That is no longer in question. What remains uncertain is what you will become. The question lingered long after the conversation ended. The next challenge came from within the estate itself. A long-standing steward, respected and quietly influential, submitted his resignation without warning. His letter was brief, courteous, and troubling. He cited personal reasons, but the timing was unmistakable. His departure would destabilize operations and signal internal dissent. The Duke read the letter twice. "He has never acted impulsively," he said. "This is calculated." "He expects disruption," she replied. "Or reaction. Which will you give him?" the Duke asked. She thought carefully. Neither. Instead of announcing the resignation immediately, she requested a private meeting with the steward. When he arrived, his expression was guarded but respectful. "You intend to leave," she said calmly. "Yes," he replied. "I believe it is best." "For whom?" she asked. He hesitated. "For the estate." She inclined her head slightly. "Then allow me to ask you something. If you believe this decision strengthened the estate, would you have concealed your reasons?" Silence stretched between them. "You fear direction you cannot control," she said gently. "Not failure." His composure cracked just slightly. "Change invites chaos," he said. "Only when leadership withdraws," she replied. "If you leave now, others will follow, not out of conviction, but uncertainty." He looked at her for a long moment. "And if I stay, then you help shape what comes next," she said, rather than criticize it from a distance. By evening, his resignation was withdrawn. Word spread quietly, but its impact was immediate. Stability had been preserved not through authority, but persuasion. The lesson did not go unnoticed. That night, alone with the Duke in the study, she allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. "I am tired," she admitted. He regarded her carefully. "You are carrying more than you realize." "I chose this," she said. "Yes," he replied, "but choosing does not lessen weight." For the first time, he placed a hand briefly over hers, an unspoken acknowledgement rather than comfort. The gesture was simple, restrained, and profound. Another week passed before the next escalation. An official communiqué arrived from the capital, formal and precise. It acknowledged the recent arbitration and requested representation at an upcoming assembly. Not observation, representation. "They are recognizing authority," the Duke said. "They are testing it," she corrected. Attendance would require her to speak not for the estate alone, but for its alliances. Every word would be recorded, every stance remembered. The night before departure, she stood once more at the window, the familiar position now transformed by experience. Fear was still present, but it no longer dominated. It sharpened her awareness, reminded her of consequence. The Duke joined her. "This will be different," he said. "The capital does not forgive missteps. Neither does this estate," she replied. "Yet here we stand." He nodded. "You are ready." She turned to him. "Ready is relative, but I am resolved." At dawn, the carriages departed. As the estate disappeared behind them, she understood the truth she had been circling for weeks. Her presence here was no longer defined by acceptance or opposition. It was defined by expectation. And expectations, once established, demanded fulfillment. The capital rose before them in layers of stone and steel, older than memory and sharper than rumor. As the carriages passed through its gates, she felt the weight of countless decisions embedded in its streets. This was not a place that observed quietly. It judged actively. The assembly was housed in a hall designed to intimidate. Columns towered overhead, banners of rival houses hanging in careful balance, each one a reminder of power gained and lost. Delegates filled the chamber in measured clusters, their attention shifting as she entered beside the Duke. Recognition was immediate. Some inclined their heads in acknowledgement. Others watched without expression. A few allowed faint smiles that held no warmth. She recognized the pattern now. Curiosity had given way to calculation. The opening addresses were procedural, but beneath the formality, tension coiled. This gathering was not about policy alone. It was about hierarchy. When her turn came to speak, the room stilled. She did not begin with defense. She began with continuity. "Our region has endured because it adapts without erasing its foundations," she said calmly. "Recent decisions have not altered that principle. They have reinforced it." Murmurs followed, subdued but attentive. She spoke of shared routes, mutual security, long-term stability. She acknowledged past failures without assigning blame. It was a careful balance, firm enough to command respect, restrained enough to avoid provocation. When she finished, silence held for a breath, longer than comfort allowed. Then questions came. They were precise, challenging, intentionally layered. She answered without hesitation, drawing from experience rather than theory. Where she lacked authority, she deferred openly to the Duke. Where she held it, she did not dilute it. By the time the session ended, positions had shifted, not all in her favor. A senior representative from the North requested a private exchange. His reputation preceded him. Strategic, unforgiving, influential. "You speak well," he said once they were alone. "But influence here is not earned through eloquence." "Nor should it be," she replied. "It should be earned through reliability." He studied her. "You are positioning yourself carefully." "I am positioning the estate," she said. "My role is incidental." A sharp smile crossed his face. "No one here believes that." The encounter ended without resolution, but she recognized it for what it was, acknowledgement without acceptance. That evening, during a formal reception, alliances formed in quieter ways. Conversations overlapped. Promises were hinted, never stated. She navigated them deliberately, aware that every alignment carried cost. The Duke remained close, but not overshadowing. Their coordination was seamless now, practiced. Observers noticed. Before midnight, a message arrived requesting her presence at a smaller council the following morning. Attendance was selective, strategic. "They're accelerating," the Duke said quietly. "So are we," she replied. The smaller council was less ceremonial and far more dangerous. No speeches, no audience, only decisions. A proposal was placed on the table, one that would consolidate control over a contested corridor. Profitable, efficient, risky. Support was divided. She listened carefully before speaking. "This will succeed in the short term," she said, "and fracture trust in the long term. Control obtained without consent invites resistance." A counterargument followed, sharp and dismissive. She did not argue. She reframed. "If resistance grows," she said, "this corridor becomes a liability rather than an asset. Stability cannot be enforced indefinitely. It must be maintained." Silence followed. The proposal was tabled, not rejected, deferred. When the session ended, the Duke leaned toward her. "You prevented a mistake," he said. "I postponed one," she replied. "That may be enough." Their return to the estate was quieter than their arrival. The capital had not rejected her, but it had not embraced her either. That was expected. What unsettled her was the realization that her absence had altered dynamics back home. Upon arrival, she was greeted with reports of disputes settled in her favor, inquiries held for her return, decisions delayed awaiting her input. She had become a fixed point. That night, as she reviewed correspondence by candlelight, exhaustion finally pressed heavily against her resolve. The Duke stood in the doorway, watching her. "You cannot carry this alone," he said. "I am not," she replied, "but I am responsible." He stepped closer. "Responsibility shared is still heavy," he said, "but it is survivable." She looked up at him, then really looked. What they had built was no longer provisional. It was structural, and structures, once load-bearing, could not be removed without collapse. She understood now. The next phase would not be about proving her place. It would be about defending it. Defending her place did not begin with confrontation. It began with endurance. The days following their return tested her resolve in quieter, more insidious ways. Requests multiplied. Advisors sought her input before approaching the Duke. Decisions that once passed through established channels now paused at her door. She had become a filter, and filters absorb pressure. She adjusted her routine without complaint, rising earlier, retiring later, learning where delegation was necessary and where presence was essential. Authority, she discovered, was not asserted through command alone. It was maintained through consistency. Not everyone approved. A faction within the council began to coalesce, subtle, disciplined, patient. They spoke of tradition, of caution, of restoring balance. None mentioned her by name. but she felt the intent clearly enough. The Duke noticed it too. "They are consolidating," he said one evening, reviewing council notes. "Not against me, against uncertainty." "And I represent uncertainty," she replied. "You represent change," he corrected. "They fear losing influence they can no longer predict." She closed the ledger in front of her. "Then they will try to isolate me." "Yes," he said, "or force an error." She met his gaze steadily. "Then I cannot afford one." The opportunity they waited for came sooner than expected. A border incident flared unexpectedly. Minor, contained, but visible. A shipment was delayed. Guards clashed briefly. Tempers escalated. Nothing irreversible, but enough to demand response. The council convened immediately. Voices rose. Opinions hardened. Some urged decisive retaliation. Others argued restraint. The room divided sharply. She listened. Then she spoke. "This incident was provoked," she said calmly. "But escalation would validate that provocation." A lord leaned forward. "Restraint will be interpreted as weakness." "Only if followed by silence," she replied. "We will respond, but proportionally, visibly, and with purpose." "And who decides purpose?" Another voice challenged. She did not hesitate. "Those willing to be accountable for outcome." The Duke spoke then. "She will oversee the response." The declaration was deliberate, unavoidable. The decision passed. Within hours, instructions were sent. The response was swift but measured. Reinforcement without aggression, communication without concession. The border stabilized. The message carried was unmistakable. Control did not require chaos. The following council session was quieter. Later that night, the Duke's mother summoned her. "You handled the incident effectively," she said. "But effectiveness invites challenge." "I expect nothing less," she replied. The older woman regarded her carefully. "Then understand this. The next challenge will not come from policy. It will come from perception." She nodded. "They will question legitimacy." "Yes," the Duke's mother said, "and they will do so publicly." The warning proved accurate. An announcement arrived days later. A ceremonial convocation, widely attended, officially celebratory, unofficially evaluative. Her presence would not be optional. "They want to see how you stand," the Duke said. "Alone." "And you?" she asked. "I will be present," he replied, "but I will not intervene." She understood the implication immediately. This was not abandonment. It was trust. The convocation filled the grand hall to capacity. Noble houses, advisors, observers. All eyes followed her as she entered. She felt no fear, only focus. When invited to speak, she stepped forward without hesitation. She did not argue for her position. She defined it. "I did not arrive here by claim or inheritance," she said evenly. "I arrived by necessity. This estate required stability, and I responded." Murmurs followed. "I did not replace tradition," she continued. "I uphold its purpose, to endure." Silence settled. She concluded without flourish, without plea. When she stepped back, the room exhaled collectively. There was no immediate applause, no dramatic affirmation. There was something more dangerous. Acceptance. As the gathering dispersed, she realized the truth. They would not challenge her openly again. From now on, opposition would be quieter, sharper, more personal. And she would have to meet it without hesitation. Because endurance, once proven, demanded defense not just of position, but of self.